hybrids are long irons and she's hitting her 9-iron. So,
Yeah, it's quite impressive.
yes, it is.
So yeah, I think that went well.
Good. Good job. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It's an interesting conversation to be a fly on the wall for when you have no idea what you two are talking about.
We're talking about the Ronald McDonald House Golf Tournament on Monday, which I was actually hoping and planning to make a brief announcement at the meeting today via Zoom, but I'm getting chat messages from Barb saying they still can't get the sound figured out from Zoom. So I think Heather is there and she's going to do it for me.
You should be thankful, John. Last time Brad got on, he did a full seminar with Alyssa Brandt on fireplaces.
It's true, and we're still waiting for our Brandt visit to check on our gas fireplace.
Yeah,
Awesome.
you're just showing off.
Test. Test, test. Test, test, test. Test, test, test. Test, test, test.
What would have changed? We just had it all, right? Yeah, I know. Test, 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 test.
Test, test, test.
It's everything's going through your mixer at this point. So your line.
Test.
Right, and that's what it was on before.
Test, test.
We've had 65.
Phone turned on, like made sure that
They said the channel was turned off.
or something. But granted, we didn't turn it off, but.
I'm gonna run to the back office and check our main tower.
Okay.
One guy came in.
Yeah.
And he was on his phone.
In his app, yeah. That.
We are muted, Russ.
Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. I pledge allegiance.
Thank you. You may be seated. I want to welcome everyone to Iowa City Noon Rotary. It's great to see all your smiling faces every Thursday. Thanks for joining us. Please help me welcome Kelly Drown, who's going to introduce our visitors. Kelly?
Hello and welcome to Rotary. If you have brought a guest, if you could please make your way up front. And when you announce your guest, please state your name as well as your guests, and we'll have your guest stand as we welcome you. As far as visiting Rotarians, we would like to welcome Lori Waylert, and she is from downtown Cedar Rapids and was a past president. Please stand and let us welcome you. Welcome. I would like to also welcome Ian Carlson. He is a guest of Vern Folkman, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, but welcome Ian, and thanks for joining us again.
Hello, everyone. I'm Barb Thomas, and my guest. So one is our speaker, Jen Blackhurst. She is a professor of business analytics at the Tibby College, and you'll hear more about her in a few minutes when she's introduced. But then in addition, her mom is here with us, Jane Vincent.
Hi, I'm Julie Zerwick, and my guest is my daughter, Amy. She is going to be a junior at West High. She's in the 1440 club, and she's also been selected for the RILA conference in Grinnell this year. So she'll be coming back and talking to us, I think, in August about it.
Good day to you, fellow Rotarians. I am lucky enough to have as my guest Mark Abel for third or fourth consecutive week. He's showing some great attendance, and if you get a chance to talk to him, urge him to try to become a member of our club.
Special welcome to all of our guests. And as a reminder, if you want to bring a guest, if you have someone you know who you think would be a good Rotarian, a coworker, a neighbor, a friend, our club will buy lunch for your guests. So just let us know in advance and we'd be happy to do that. Now, every week we have a nice audience that joins us on Zoom. And I'm going to pass the microphone over and we're going to welcome our Zoom guest today.
On Zoom today, we have Dick Johns, Ann Parker, Brad Baldus, Sherry Sperlin, Chris Catney, Diane Huber, Jim Scott, McGivern, Nancy Q, Ray and Linda Mustin, Robin Hepker, Sean Headland, Steve Wilkin, and Tim Walsh.
Great, thanks, Ed. Special announcement I wanted to start off with Steve Headland. If Steve could stand real quick. Steve joined our Rotary Club in 1972, so he's celebrating his 50th anniversary in Rotary. And he's also, besides for being a great Rotarian, Steve's son is also a member of our club, and Steve was a former president of our club. So Steve, congratulations on 50 great years. Now, I'd like to invite anyone up to the podium if you have a Rotary announcement. I know Heather has one about our Ronald McDonald Golf outing that happened this Monday. Heather?
Hi, I am stepping in for Brad. They couldn't get the the sound audio to happen from Zoom. So I am reading through what Brad wanted to highlight from our Monday event. On a personal note, it was amazing. The rain held off. So first, it was a great day. And although there was a threat of rain in the days leading up to the tournament, on Monday, the rain held off until the last 10 minutes or so of play, and then it just sprinkled and went away. We were able to return to our regular shotgun format where everyone tees off at the same time and finishes about the same time. So we were thrilled to be able to go back to the regular format. We had a full subscription of 144 golfers, so it was a packed event, but the play flowed beautifully and everyone had a great time. The dinner buffet at Bumps was absolutely amazing. If you haven't tried Bumps yet, I do recommend it. We had a lovely pulled pork and roast chicken dinner that was divine. The committee members received lots of positive feedback on how the event was conducted and the enjoyment of the experience. At the buffet dinner at Bumps, we had a family that is currently staying at RMHC speak about how meaningful it's been for them to have a place to stay and congregate as a family. They've been there since March 2nd and will most likely be there until the middle of October. They have a baby in the NICU, little Maple, and they have Elowen and Flora, who are two little girls that are staying with us as well. So they are just absolutely amazed. They came to us from Des Moines because of the world-class NICU that the University of Iowa has, and are just incredibly grateful for all of the support that they've gotten, and we're thrilled to come and speak at the golf outing. There were lots of prizes handed out to the lucky and skilled golfers. And we were thrilled to say that all of the prizes were handed out. The past couple of years, we've always had some left over. Everybody stuck around and got their prizes, which just absolutely thrilled us, because that means that everybody had a great time and stayed to enjoy the camaraderie after the golf outing. And a huge shout out to our volunteers, who were wonderful and are very much appreciated. And I'm adding this in. If you volunteered at the event, I know there are several on Zoom, stand up. And our ones on, thank you. Literally, we cannot hold this event without the volunteers. So we really, really appreciate all of the hard work and time that was put in for our volunteers. And that is all. Thank you.
Heather, being a fundraiser, I'm always excited to hear big numbers, and I'm going to have you share the total amount that we've raised lifetime.
Okay, so preliminarily, because we haven't gotten all of the donations and expenses, before expenses this year, it looks like we've raised $67,000 for the event. Expenses are typically right around 15, so we're at about 52, give or take. This is a generalization, which means we have about 20,000 to go before we hit that 1 million mark. So we are up to about $980,000 that has been raised for Ronald McDonald House from this golf outing.
Rotary impacts a lot of organizations in our community and beyond, and this is just another great example of the great work that we're doing and how we're helping a local nonprofit. So happy to be part of that. Final announcement, our Rotary annual dues were in the renewal process, and we hope everyone will join us on the Rotary journey again next year. Madeline, if you want to raise your hand, if you have your check here today, Madeline, our treasurer, is here today, would be happy to take it. We're asking for the dues to be returned by June 15th. So let us know if you have any questions, and we hope everyone can renew. If you cannot for some reason, we'd love to welcome you back in the future when the time is right, but let us know as soon as possible just so we can update our records. And we're going to wait on Smile to the end in case we have time. I want to give our speaker plenty of time. So I'd like to introduce Kelly Drown. We've got a great program today that I'm excited about. And Kelly to the podium again to introduce our speaker.
So Jen Blackhurst was invited by Barb, but Barb is doing our technical. So I am filling in, but I'm delighted. You're doing a great job. I'm delighted because not only is Jen Blackhurst, a renowned colleague, but she's also a friend of mine. So I feel spoiled that I get to do this. It is my pleasure today to introduce Jen Blackhurst. Jen serves as Associate Dean of Graduate Management Programs at the University of Iowa's Tippie College of Business. In this role, she oversees all of Iowa's MBA programs, as well as our specialty master's programs in business analytics and finance. She holds the Leonard A. Hadley Professorship and is a professor of data analytics. An expert in supply chain, she is frequently quoted in the media on such topics. She is a member of the Supply Chain Management Professionals Organization and a Decision Scientists Institute. Jen received the 2020 Research Impact Award for Senior Faculty Research at the Tippie College, as well as the MBA Business Analytics Professor of the Year Award in 2016. She has several degrees in engineering, including a bachelor's and a master's in industrial and manufacturing systems engineering from Ohio University, and a PhD in industrial engineering from the University of Iowa. Jen began her career at Rockwell Collins before moving to academia. She has taught at North Carolina State and at Iowa State before coming to Iowa. Please join me in welcoming Jen Blackhurst, Dr. Jen Blackhurst.
Thank you, Kelly. Gosh, it's such a pleasure to be here today to share a little bit about what I do in my research, but also explain what is happening in today's world with our crazy supply chains. I was joking with Eric right before we started that depending on what your research area is, there's like one big time in your career where it becomes the hot topic. And right now it is supply chain. And so I have been in the news and been teased by my colleagues because I was quoted about meat supply chains and baby formula. So I know a little bit more than just those two, but I'm really happy to be here today. And what I wanted to do was just explain what are some of the problems with supply chains and why are we having such a hard time with them? And many of you might not have heard of the term supply chain before the pandemic, and it has become very difficult to get a hold of the goods that we want. So I wanted to first explain, when you hear the word supply chain, you often think, oh, it goes from here to here to here to here. And it sounds linear and it sounds simple. But supply chains really are quite complex. And I'm going to show you a picture later that my research team at the University of Iowa focused on to give you an idea of how complex these supply chains become. But if you're, for example, a manufacturer of baby formula, you have suppliers. Your suppliers have suppliers. Your suppliers have suppliers. And so it becomes very, very complex very quickly. And add to that the fact that many partners in a supply chain will be all over the world. And so that, coupled with disruptions and problems with transportation, make managing supply chains really, really difficult. When I teach supply chains, I try to make it relevant to the people that I'm teaching it to. And I taught our executive MBA class for the first time in fall. We relaunched our executive MBA program, and this is how I got them to care about it. I said supply chains at the time is affecting bacon, booze, and coffee. And so even if you don't think you care about supply chain, you probably do if you like one of those things. And so I could even come up with many more examples, but bacon prices have skyrocketed. We're experiencing shortages in things like fertilizer. The prices have gone way up. That's going to impact supply chains really for years to come. In terms of liquor, this one I thought was interesting. There was a shortage, maybe not so much of the material, the actual product, but what to store it in. So the packaging really became a big issue. And then coffee, in the fall, they were projecting a shortage that could last up to 3 years. And so all of these things, coupled with the fact that our global transportation and supply chain systems have been compromised, make you getting your products difficult, and often they cost more money. So a couple of the big events that we've had over the past couple of years. So if you think back to March of 2020, that's when we started to see lots of shutdowns happening at the university. We didn't have students come back after spring break. We actually did a joint panel working with Operation Warp Speed to understand how vaccines were being distributed. And so we worked with them with some of our students. And in December of 2020, the vaccines began to be distributed. Interestingly, within the first week of distributing vaccines, there were 7 major snowstorms across the US. And so getting that out to people at a time when that was critical became a huge issue. You probably remember about a year ago, the Suez Canal was blocked by a ship that ran aground, and that blocked trade routes for a number of days. In June of 2021, there was an outbreak at a port in China that we might not all have heard about here, but that shut down the port, which then shut down our ability to have product shipped here into the US. What you probably did see around that time, if you were watching the news, were many news stories where you could see ships being backed up and waiting to come in. And in many cases, that would take weeks and weeks and weeks for them to come in. The Biden administration actually mandated, if you remember, that the ports should be open 24/7. So that was great, but then that just exposed another bottleneck in our supply chains, which was the trucks coming in or the rail yards being able to ship products out of those port areas. So it becomes very, very complex. In 2022, Russia invades Ukraine. We continue to see disruptions throughout our global supply chains. So this was the Suez Canal blockage. This is actually a photo of the Evergreen. And it was, again, blocking a major trade route for us to be able to move product into the US. Port congestion, as I mentioned, became a major issue. So once the ports were open 24/7, that still is an issue for the drivers in the rail yards to be able to get the product, to get it on to the transportation routes that they need to go to. So it really was an issue at that point, if we're talking about these trade routes and where things are coming from, an issue of bottlenecks. So these are actually some pictures, and there can be more than one bottleneck where everything is kind of clogged up and you can't funnel it through in a supply chain, and they can shift over time. And we saw that with the ports and opening the ports, but then a new bottleneck was exposed. So supply chains are global, they are interconnected, and they have bottlenecks. We haven't even been talking about specific products yet, and we're going to get into that in a couple of minutes. The other thing that's been happening is a shipping container shortage. And so if you watch the news and you see pictures like you see here, those shipping containers are full of product. You load them up at a port, let's say in China or somewhere overseas, put them on a large container ship, and then ship them over to the US. With all of the transportation problems, there actually was a shortage for a number of months of containers to be able to be put on those ships. Interestingly, many of those containers, as you see, can also be stacked right onto a truck or right onto a rail car. And so as our entire transportation system became very clogged, then we started to experience another problem, which was the shortage of container ships or containers to put on the ships. The cost of everything is skyrocketing as well. So I don't even have in here right now the high cost of fuel that we're all experiencing in our own checkbooks, but just looking at a manufacturer and what it costs to ship something from overseas. So back in October of 2020, to ship one of those containers that you saw, a 40-foot container, would be about $2,000. Then it became where there was a shortage of all of those things: labor, ports being shut down, capacity on the ships, the trade routes being open. And it jumped up to about $11,000 to ship just one of those containers a year ago. I just gave a presentation in April to a group of industry folks, and they were telling me that their costs had skyrocketed even more to about $20,000. And they were complaining that money buys capacity. And so some of them were saying it costs $20,000, but to even get your product in the queue to be shipped, they were talking 25, some were even saying $30,000. And that's just to ship one of those containers from overseas in Asia to here in the United States. So what is being impacted? Gosh, it is, here's how I've been describing this as I've been talking to my students and to news outlets. It really has been a perfect storm of why you can't get all of the product that you need in a really timely manner and why costs are really going up. So all of the shutdowns that we saw very early on, shutdowns at manufacturing facilities overseas, here in the US, shutdowns at ports, truck drivers not being able to move product, bottlenecks in the transportation routes that we just talked about. Then there are the labor shortages. And so how do we get people in these positions at the ports, driving the trucks, working in the manufacturing facilities to get product out to us as the end customer? The labor shortage has been a massive, massive issue for our supply chains. Material shortages. You've probably all heard about the microchips. And you think, okay, it's microchips. What does that really impact? Well, it impacts just about everything. So you think about just a car, right? And you've probably heard about how microchips are impacting the auto industry. A car will have hundreds of these. Our cell phones have them, the laptops, like the sound systems, everything uses microchips, and many, many, many of them. So there are things that are being done, like manufacturing facilities being ramped up here in the United States, but those take a massive investment and will be years down the road. And then finally, changes in consumer demand. So this one I think is really, really interesting. So we've been talking a lot about product coming in and can we get it fast enough and what's happening. Well, we have to forecast what consumers are going to want during these times of change. And this has been super interesting because when the pandemic first hit, I'm going to give you an example. The lumber industry actually shut down their mills because they figured there would be a shortage. There had been labor issues at the mills with people being sick. That caused a shortage of lumber. Then you saw people wanting to do more home improvement items because they were stuck home, new homes being built. The shortage of lumber then drove prices up. And so all of these things are really, really interconnected. I put resins on there because at that same industry presentation I was giving, some of the folks in the room were talking about just a shortage of resins, and resins go into all of their product. And so it's the raw material that you and I as end consumers really aren't thinking about, but it is critical for them to manufacture the parts that they need to be able to get a product into our hands. So we can talk about specific disruption points in a supply chain, a port being shut down, the blockage in the Suez Canal, not having enough labor. But the other thing about supply chains is what I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, is that they're interconnected and interconnected in a really tight way. So I'm going to talk about something called the ripple effect. It's also called propagation or the bullwhip effect. And I laugh whenever I teach this concept to undergrad students, and I'll say it's like Indiana Jones, right? And he has the whip and one flick of the wrist at one end, and no one knows what I'm talking about with Indiana Jones. So I hope that this crowd does, because Indiana Jones is really cool. So the bullwhip effect is really a small shift in demand at any point in the supply chain can really ripple, and just like a small flick of the wrist is small at one end, it grows and grows and grows over time. So what you see is that even if there are what we would consider relatively small changes in demand at the end customer, if we move back to the retailer, back to the distributor, back to the factory, back through the supply chain, if there's not great visibility, if we don't know why this is happening, if there's not communication, we don't know why this is happening. And so things like toilet paper, where did demand really change? No, people were hoarding it. There was a spike in demand that sent crazy demand signals back through the supply chain. And it was actually originally researched using Pampers. So P&G partnered with a group of researchers out of Stanford looking at this. And if you looked at birth rates and what were end customers buying patterns looking like, relatively stable, small changes. But as you move back through the supply chain, it looked like there are huge swings in demand. And that's just because of this ripple effect that goes through the supply chain. So the toilet paper one is the example. I also became an expert allowing people to tease me about toilet paper shortages. But very small changes in the customers, right? I don't want to be short on this thing. I'm going to buy more, and it caused these huge swings in demand. And so we start to see that even with some of the more recent shortages. And I'm going to talk about baby formula in just a couple of minutes. This is also interesting because we can talk about this bullwhip effect, and we talk about an increase in demand and what that does, and then we're having shortages. But what we're now seeing just this week at Target is the other part of that swing. And so Target is actually warning that profits are going to suffer due to that mismatch in signals, right? And so they're saying that during the pandemic and even in the months leading up to today, they've been ordering lots and lots of products because we as consumers have been complaining, why are there shortages of everything? And so they were stocking up on things like patio furniture and things that you can use to entertain yourself. Well, now we're in a situation where because of the economy, consumers are now shifting their demand focus, focusing on things more like fuel and food and putting food on the table. And so now Target is saying they're going to suffer in terms of profits because now they have too much inventory, or they have too much inventory of the wrong thing. And so you can be watching over the next couple of months. They'll be discounting some of their prices, as well as canceling orders with some of their key suppliers. I mentioned very quickly that I just wanted to show you a visual picture. I love this picture because it's shocking how crazy it looks. And so this is a group of researchers out of the university. We used access to a database, and our programming, we're scraping data off of the web. And what we wanted to do is understand what does a supply chain look like? In many cases, if I'm a manufacturer, I know who my tier 1 suppliers are, but do I know who my tier 2 and my tier 3? Do I know who their suppliers are? And that exposes me to risk if I don't know this. So we went and we looked at Boeing, that you see up there, as we call it the seed node. And we said, okay, Boeing, who are their customers and who are their tier 1 suppliers? And for those tier 1 suppliers, meaning one jump back in the supply chain, who are their customers besides Boeing and their suppliers, and so on and so on. And we went back 3 levels. And when I say supply chain early on, I said, oh, you probably think of something kind of linear, a chain. All right, are you ready to see what this thing looked like? That is the picture of what it looks like. And so I call this, the non-technical term, the hairball model, because just going back those 3 steps on the right-hand side, it looks relatively simple, right? 3 tiers back in the supply chain, but it's literally thousands and thousands of nodes, and companies and industries that you don't think are connected are in fact connected. And so it becomes very messy very, very quickly. And so this is what supply chains are dealing with, not the simple example on the right-hand side. The reality is on the left-hand side. So I love that picture. It always is shocking. One last example in the time I have left, because I want to leave some time for questions. You may have all heard of a shortage of baby formula, infant formula recently. And this is a great concern for many families. They're not able to get the formula that they need to feed their babies and infants. And so why did this one happen? And so this is really interesting because it is in part how their supply chain is designed and a series of events that happened. So when you look at the baby formula product and industry in the United States, there are about 4 companies that account for over 90%. I think it's close to 98% of all of the baby formula that we consume here in the United States. And because it is very highly regulated for good reason, we're not importing baby formula. We actually export baby formula, but we don't import baby formula. One of those plants, one of those companies is Abbott Labs. Back in February, they had an issue with bacteria contamination. And they think that they had traced the bacteria contamination to making a handful of infants sick. And then unfortunately, 2 of the infants died. And so they not only issued a recall, the FDA actually went in and shut that plant down. Okay, for good reason. We want to make sure in the investigation, they did find the plant was in violation of many safety standards. What you probably didn't realize when they did that was that Abbott Lab facility up in Michigan accounts for 40% of all of the baby formula production here in the United States. So by shutting this down, it completely crippled the supply chain for baby formula. And so that happened in February. At the end of May, across the United States, we were seeing about a 70% out of stock of baby formula. So if you go in and you want it 70% of the time, or 70% is not there. And in some states, you were seeing upwards of 90%, that there literally was nothing for families to find to feed their children. So it finally got the attention of the FDA and the government. I won't even go into how the WIC program operates, but WIC is actually a consumer of over 50% of all of the baby formula in the United States, and it's done on a state-by-state basis. And if we even look at birth rates, and are they going up, or are they going down, there just wasn't a whole lot of capacity because birth rates aren't rapidly rising here in the United States. So what happened after this, and this is all within the last week, the FDA stepped in. They worked with that facility to get it back up and running. I think it was June 4th, they got it back up and running, but it's going to take until June 20th to get product out to the shelves. And those shelves are already very low. And so that bullwhip effect that we talked about earlier is going to impact this. They invoked the Defense Production Act, which means that manufacturers of baby formula will have priority over all other types of companies that use the product that goes into baby formula. They launched Operation Fly Formula, and I think they've done about 4 runs where we normally don't bring baby formula in from other parts of the world, but if we made it, it meets FDA standards, we will then go out, fly it, and bring it back in, which causes other bottlenecks with inspecting to make sure it's safe, that we don't have any counterfeit and that sort of thing. So the government is finally seeing this, but this is one example on how a glitch in the supply chain, that plant being shut down, when you look at how that supply chain was designed, 40% of the US market was coming out of that one plant. Then we see panic setting in, and panic because people want to be able to feed their children. And so now we're going to see the hoarding of the formula, which I would do, even though I know it's the wrong thing to do. It's the natural reaction of you as a parent, if you can get your hands on that baby formula. So we're going to see crazy things with demand. So it is being addressed, and we are seeing some relief, but it is going to be months before we see that back to normal. So finally, I went a little bit long, but I think those examples are really fantastic. Companies are really going to have to be thinking about how they manage their inventory levels, how are they managing, understanding where risk is. So there's risk in a supplier shutting down, but there's risks in how we create our supply chains. So you'll see some supply chains are being redesigned where we're bringing product back closer to home. We might have smaller regional supply chains. We want more visibility on who our supply chain partners are. Where is the inventory in our supply chain? And how far back can we see in terms of visibility? And working with supply chain partners on, okay, this Abbott plant is down, but I have these other Johnson & Johnson Gerber facilities. How quickly can they ramp up on production to get things up and running? And so this flexibility. So it's not one right answer of carrying massive amounts of inventory, but it's also not the right answer to run entirely lean, that a disruption like this will completely catch you by surprise. So I went through that kind of quickly, but I just wanted to give you an idea of what the heck is happening with your supply chains. Why are you seeing shortages of some things, not others? Why are prices going up, then going down? Why can't I get the things that I need? Why does shipping take so long? It's this combination of all of these factors that affect our very, very, very complex and global supply chains. So Barb, I know we need to end right at 1. I have about 5 minutes. If anybody has any questions. Yes, sir. Yeah, that is an issue. So making sure that we're buying the capacity, and are we keeping it all in the US or are we shipping it to other parts of the world? I think another really, really big issue is the shortage that we're seeing on fertilizer and the massive spikes and increase in fertilizer, and that's going to impact yields. It's going to impact the cost to farmers. And so it is a big mess for things that are critical to our economy, like these crops. We need to have government regulations stepping in. Yep. There's shortages. There's shortages of drivers. There's shortages of capacity. And so it's lining those transportation routes up ahead of time. The costs are going to go up. It is a mangled mess right now. But we can plan for it. We can know where the shortages are coming, that sort of thing. We can better utilize technology. But for us here in Iowa, that is a really, really huge issue. Companies are also looking at things like automated trucking, driverless trucking, right? But those are a series of steps down the road. And even, this is more than you bargained for when you asked that question, even looking at pay rates for drivers in our standards. So there are limits to how long a driver is allowed to be operating. But what we're seeing now in our supply chains is that it's not, the drivers aren't spending all of that time driving as they've done in the past, because everything is so backed up and clogged. They might pull into a facility and spend 3-4 hours at a dock waiting to get loaded and unloaded. And that counts against their time and it counts against their pay. And so we're going to have to relook really at all of that. Yes. 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 That is super fascinating. So they are just obviously a world leader in supply chain. And so throughout all of this, they have been expanding, looking at things you might have heard, like looking at drone deliveries. But even beyond that, that might be a little bit further in the future. They are buying and contracting out their own driver system. And so we have all of these supply chains that are local. They're specifically putting product in certain warehouse locations based on using artificial intelligence to note that, you know, they think that you will like this product and in this region, here's where we want to hold all this. They're also paying attention to what you buy. And so you probably notice that they'll say, oh, we saw you like this thing, maybe you would like this. And so they have been incredibly proactive on expanding their supply chain and moving forward and utilizing massive amounts of technology in their warehouses, their transportation systems. You will now see the Amazon drivers driving around, and that's completely different than what it had been 5-10 years ago. Yes, yes. Yeah, when we were talking to the Operation Warp Speed folks, they ended up partnering with UPS, and they had gone through different options, and the US mail service just simply wasn't an option because of flexibility. And actually UPS ended up making a lot of the dry ice that the early vaccines needed when it was being distributed. So that efficiency in supply chain, you might not have heard it 10 years ago, but it impacts literally everything in our economy right now. Thank you.
In honor of our speaker each week, we make a donation to the Rotary Polio Plus program, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation matches that 2-to-1, and that'll result in 70 polio vaccinations around the world in your honor. So thank you again, Jennifer. Another great program next Thursday, we have Shelley Wells Kane talking about the Girl Scouts in the state of Iowa. Should be another good program. And we conclude with the Rotary 4-way test. If everyone could please rise and join me in our 4-way test of the things we think, say, or do. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Hope everyone has a great weekend, and we are adjourned.